What do you know about politics? What should you know? Forget views, beliefs, and opinions. Politics is really a science, and that's where we come in. Welcome to Inside Political Science. I'm Kirby Goodell.
I'm Todd Kent, and we're your guides to what's actually happening in politics. We're using our years of experience to navigate political data, media, money, behavior, and more to educate and inform you.
Hello and welcome to Inside Political Science. It's our 25th episode, Todd. 25 episodes. You didn't think this was going to happen, did you?
No, it's amazing. I think we've covered a lot of ground and look forward to the ground we're going to cover in the future.
Yeah, and today we have a really special episode. I think I'm super excited about it. We're going to talk about bail reform and criminal justice in Texas. And we have a special guest with us, Ken Good. He's an attorney, got his JD at Texas Tech. I won't say the year. You may not mind, but lots of experience. Has tried cases before the U.S. Appeals Court, the Texas Supreme Court, and feel free to add anything in there that you want. But the reason we're really excited about having you here today, you are a attorney for the. You're a Texas bail attorney works with the Professional Bondsmen Association, and this is an emergency item before the Texas state legislature, right?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me.
How did we get to where we are today? Can you give us a brief history of kind of the reform efforts when it comes to bail and kind of how we got to where we are today? And that's why we're talking here today to talk about these things.
Well, probably the last decade, we've had proposals across the country to reform bail. We're kind of repeating the same mistakes that we made in the 60s. In the 60s, we felt safe, so we were more forgiving on our criminal laws, and then crime started to increase, and then we didn't have an agreement, or the two sides couldn't work together on how to address it, and so we ended up having a stalemate for a period of time, which resulted in a backlash, which gave us Reagan and the war on drugs. We've kind of repeated those same mistakes. Probably in 2018, 2019, we were feeling really safe, and so we became more forgiving on our criminal laws. We've had a push for this bail reform. I think what we've discovered now is we have these activist groups on the far left that are just so organized, and they have so much money, and they lie. And so they've been pushing reforms that are not based on real science, they're based on pseudoscience. And I think that the science since then has proven that. And so Texas, they filed bills for this bad bail reform, but they never passed. They got close, but they never passed. But they passed in other places like New York. In 2019, they passed, it went into effect in 2020, and they've now rolled it back 3 times. But they still have a lot more rollback to do, because the premise of these bad bail reforms is you don't need bail. People will come to court. They want to resolve their criminal cases. And so we really don't need bail. Well, I think ever since then, we've discovered that people don't want to go to court, and they won't go to court unless you have systems in place to make them. And you have what nobody wants to talk about from these activist groups is organized crime, career criminals, and gangs. They figure out ways to make millions and millions of dollars on these bad bail reform policies. And that's really what we've seen happen. And so Texas has always opposed that. 4 years ago, they passed what is good bail reform, which is, stuff like you have to review criminal histories before setting bail, and then limited the use of free bonds for violent offenses, which I think those are all good things that strengthens the criminal justice system. And this session, I think they're wanting to go further. The constitutional amendments are to make it even stronger, to strengthen preventative detention in a select series of cases, and also to address illegal immigration if you're accused of a felony. And I think those are all good things that are good for the criminal justice system and that would strengthen it. I think what you've seen, especially 10 years ago and for the first few years, is things that weakened the criminal justice system. And we've now reaped the rewards of that. And so we know how to fight crime. We know what to do. It's just, are we going to support our police to do it? And in so many places, especially in our urban areas, we don't.
But now this was also, and correct me if you think I'm mischaracterizing this, but it was also something that the right was also part of, right? Like the Koch Foundation
You're
and other
very,
groups
very good point.
have really been supportive of the idea of criminal justice reform, and especially looking at pretrial procedures to try to figure out, because there's and again, you push back, feel free to push back on this. My general sense is that on both the left and the right, this was one area where we felt like we could actually find some common ground, because we were spending too much money building prisons, too much money imprisoning people, and not enough money on other things. It's hard to give tax cuts if you need to put money and you're in a state and you need to build more prisons. It's hard to spend money on education, and so there's sort of a bipartisan recognition that parts of the criminal justice system were broken and needed to be addressed, and include, like I said, coming out of groups like the Koch Foundation and other groups saying we need to do something about criminal justice.
Okay, so I will push back a little bit, but I will say from a general sense, what you're saying is correct. But the reason why I would push back is these are all think tanks that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the think tanks are funded by a lot of the same groups. And so where they may have right-wing think tanks and left-wing think tanks, the one area where these think tanks all kind of came to the same conclusion based on this science, how funny, is criminal justice reform. And, you know, they kind of all agreed for several years that the science all was the same. They were all coming to the same result. And so we could, and, you know, the right and the left supported Prop 47 in California, which I would think we would all universally would agree has been a disaster for California, because it's the thing that ended up decriminalizing theft under $950. But the reason why I would softly push back on you is because the right-wing think tanks have now hidden, and they would deny that they've ever supported those issues. And so they don't come out and say we were wrong. They now deny that they ever supported. I wrote a series of articles and right on crime, wrong on crime. And it was all focusing on the right conservative think tank, right on crime, and all the wrong positions they've taken across the country on these bad bail reform issues. Prop 47 in California, bail reform in New York. You can go on and on and on, where they would now not, they would deny that they initially supported them.
What is as we look at the Texas legislature and what's happening there, what's happening around America, what would you say, what are the key issues? What are we fighting over today that's going to change the way we look at bail and maybe criminal justice moving forward?
Well, you know, in the 60s, we ended up having a backlash. I think we've already started a backlash. I think we had a backlash in November at the election. I think mostly it was immigration policies and, you know, the economy, but part of it was criminal justice backlash as well. We would have had that, in my opinion, 2 years earlier, because we still had the same crime issues, but we had suppression of crime numbers, and I'll make a point about that briefly, but we also had the abortion ruling from the Supreme Court, and I think the backlash on that made up for the backlash we would have had on crime, and then the suppression of what was going on with crime was with the FBI statistics. All these pseudoscience groups were coming out with reports saying crime is not going up, it's going down. You don't have to believe us. You can look at the FBI statistics. Now, for those in the know, the FBI was converting their statistics to a new system, and police offices had to buy new equipment so that their equipment would interface with the new system. And the two largest police groups in the country, for, you know, Los Angeles and New York, weren't even on the system initially. So the scientists that look at those data were saying it was incomplete, and yet we were hearing that, you know, it's a perception versus reality issue. Look at the FBI statistics. I wrote an article in October saying all the reasons why we should not be relying upon the FBI statistics. And then 10 days later, magically, the FBI statistics were updated, and suddenly they showed crime increasing instead of going down. And I would argue it's still incomplete. But the reality was that was a month before the election, or less than a month before the election. That's when I really decided Trump's got a really strong chance of winning, because I don't think the FBI would be updating their statistics if they thought Trump was going to lose. They'd rather do it now than after he wins. And suddenly the think tanks, these pseudoscience groups, lost all their arguments. And that's when you saw them shift and start yelling, Trump is a fascist, Trump is a Hitler, because they lost all their arguments on crime. And so they had to cover it up. And that's what happened, in my opinion.
So we're starting to run out of time for this particular segment, but to sort of wrap up, could you tell us, what do you think successful bail? What would if we have it in place, would you say, oh, that's the way this should look? This is what bail reform should look like. What are the principles that should be in play?
I think the principles of successful bail reform and successful criminal justice reform has a strong component of accountability. You know, Harris County, which has tried these really bad, Houston, Texas, bad policies, has had an 80% failure to appear rate on misdemeanor cases on average for 2 years because of that. And so they have people that get 16, 17 miss court, and they still get a re-released for free. I think you have to have accountability, and you have to, so they have to know that if we miss court, there's consequences. And I think we have a case that demonstrates this. It's called Sanchez versus Alabama, where they had to live under one of these injunctions requiring them to release everyone for 4 years. And when it got reversed, they re-implemented a system of accountability and consequences. And very quickly, within 6 months, crime started going down. And it had been increasing for 4 years. So we know how to fight crime. We know what to do. It's just a question of whether we're going to allow the public to do it. And when we implement any policy that ties the hands of judges so they can't do what they need to do, or we tie the hands of police officers so they can't do what they need to do, then why would we think anything else that crime would increase?
It's isn't it true though that we're not necessarily always tying the hands of the judges, because the judges are actually setting bail
No, we are. I mean, on these bad bail reforms, we are, because like in New York, their bail reform was they implemented a whole list of charges, which were essentially all misdemeanors and low-level felonies. And if you're on this list, the judge has no option. He has to release you with no bond, no matter how many times you've committed that crime. Those are charge-based release systems. And so the judge has no discretion. His hands are tied behind his back. He has to release you every time, no matter how many times you commit the crime.
So one of the arguments by those that are promoting reform is that, some of the changes is that it's the poor who remain in jail. You know, that the rich can pay their bail and get out, where the poor remain in jail. Are there alternatives to traditional cash bail that your industry would support moving forward?
Okay, so we already support systems that are in place to protect the poor. The problem is, our friends on the left argue that even if you've got an extensive criminal record and you've got 4 prior arrests in the last 2 months, you should still be considered poor in setting bail. And if the judge sets bail in an amount that you can't afford, then it's still a violation of the Constitution, even though there's court cases that says the opposite. If you have an extensive criminal history and they set bail at an amount you can't afford, then it's because you have a criminal history, not because you're poor. And the other point I would make on this is there's a reason why the private industry has been around for 200 years. And that is, it does something, and it does it at a whole different level than anything else available. There was a retired judge who spoke on this issue at a News Nation town hall, and she said, wait, until you have an alternative that has the same level of accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. And when we're comparing a less than 10% failure to appear rate for the private industry, a 50% or 80% for the simple release mechanism, you don't have an alternative. Just using one of those will cause you to have huge backlogs and need more courts, just simply on the type of release you're using. So the alternatives have to be there to protect the poor, but they have to be used sparingly, or they create bigger problems for the county.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. I feel like I've learned a lot, and we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to continue talking.
At Texas A&M, talents are on display every day, but on a campus this large, not all talents are visible. I'm KAMU content producer Christian Hamilton, inviting you to listen to Unsung Talents, our audio series highlighting the campus jobs you don't see and the people that do them. Meet bus driver trainers, library book purchasers, sculpture cleaners, payroll administrators, and more. Listen now at tx.ag/unsung talents or on your favorite podcast platform.
Welcome back. Our conversation is still on bail reform. We have with us now a very good friend of mine, a colleague. I worked with George Naufal. He's at the PPRI. He's a Texas A&M economics PhD. He specializes in applied econometrics. He's got an incredible CV of projects that spans the scope from labor economics to healthcare to criminal justice, and that's why he's here with us now. Among other things, he's been part of a team that has been monitoring the O'Donnell consent decree in Harris County, which is monitoring some of the bail reform conditions there, but also tremendous amount of work on indigent defense and other areas of criminal justice. So welcome, George. And also, maybe the first thing is you work at the Public Policy Research Institute. I consider this one of the best kept secrets at Texas A&M because the Public Policy Research Institute does such great work in forming public policy. Can you just talk a little bit about some of what you all try to do at the PPRI?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me and for this opportunity and for the very generous introduction. My name is George Naufal, and I'm a research scientist at the Public Policy Research Institute, which is a research institute that was set up by the Texas legislature in 1983. So we literally just celebrated our 40th anniversary about a couple of years ago. And, you know, the main goal of and objective of the institute is to do applied research work that is, you know, specifically directed to help Texans, you know, and make decisions in across different sectors. I mean, we've done work in education and health. We've done work in criminal justice. Specifically over the last 20 plus years, we've, you know, we have different researchers at the Institute, and different researchers kind of follow different research interests. And one of them has been criminal justice for the last 20 plus years. And, you know, the Institute basically works with stakeholders, whether it's local, regional, or at the state level, to kind of, you know, answer very pertinent and you know, the latest kind of research questions and policy issues around the state.
So in the O'Donnell case set up, and it was about the equity in terms of bail and the provision of bail within Harris County, and you've been part of a monitoring team that's been following the progress on that. Can you talk a little bit about the work and about what you all have found and what you all are looking at, and how is it going?
So yeah, I mean, in Harris County, Houston, Texas, one of the largest counties in the U.S. You know, there was a large class act lawsuit regarding specifically misdemeanor cases in bail, where you know, the inability to be able to pay a financial bail separates basically somebody who could get out on bail and not be incarcerated at pretrial versus somebody who, with the same offense and same kind of characteristics, cannot afford to pay bail and get out. So, you know, the O'Donnell basically monitoring set up basically a 7-year monitoring team, and in fact we are now in our last year to look at the changes that Harris County has done specifically on misdemeanor offenses at the bail level, and see what kind of impact those basically changes have led to. The impact basically goes into recidivism, new criminal activity, different types of offenses, the charges when somebody comes back on a new crime, but also goes beyond that and goes through the process within the Harris County, that setting up the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, the monitoring and following basically, and cleaning the data. And that's something, another aspect of bail reform is, while everybody is pushing for applied, I guess, policy responses, but we often find ourselves that the data is not up to standard to be able to answer those questions as accurately as we would like to. And then, one of the outcomes also is cost. I mean, what is the cost pertaining to the county, and what is basically, there's different ways of looking at the cost of the county, but also cost at the society and the individual, which is a much more complicated endeavor. The findings are, very supportive of bail reform. This is specifically at the misdemeanor level. And it's encouraging, and it's something that we want to look at even more in different jurisdictions and different settings, because each of those jurisdictions have their own specific processes and structures and unique characteristics. Harris County obviously being a large county is one of those clear differences. There's no impact on criminal activity. So somebody getting out on a financial versus non-financial bail kind of ensures a more of a fair system and less of an income-dependent criminal justice system. But we don't see that there's impact on the likelihood of coming back on a crime. Some of the things that we found is failure to appear. Ultimately, from a judge's perspective or from a society's perspective, there are two things that we want to look at. What's the risk to the society, which is committing a new crime, but also the flight risk, which is will the person attend their court hearing, or will they basically fail to appear? You can put different weights on those two main outcomes, and we found some of the bond industry does succeed in making sure people don't fail to appear, simply because they have an invested interest, a financial invested interest in making sure they show up to court. But there are also other ways of maybe ensuring that happens. Some of the latest that are being studied now is text reminders, simple things like that does not really necessarily need a strong and large bond industry.
So do you have any sense, if you move beyond the misdemeanor level, you think the results will be the same, or is it going to take a whole new research study to kind of get at those answers?
I was actually a lead on a study out of Travis County that looked at the risk assessment that was introduced suddenly in January of 2014. And we found that the impact, again, there was no impact on criminal recidivism, and basically having a non-financial bail improved outcomes for those who could not afford it, the indigent defendants, just like you expected, without any drawbacks, which is basically without increasing in criminal activity, without increasing failure to appear. Everything else stayed the same. The only issue in that study that we found that the impact was short-lived. Judges used that risk assessment when it was provided to them as part of a packet for about 3 months. And maybe it was because it was novel, maybe because it was some additional piece of information. But then after 3 months, we found out they kind of went back to some sort of a habit or old ways of doing things, and that impact kind of dissipated, basically went away. So it was a very short-lived impact.
So let me just sort of restate this a little and make sure that I understand. So you all developed a calculated risk assessment that helped the judges make decisions on bail, so that when the judge made a decision, they had a better sense of what the risk of the defendant was to the community. Correct?
We did not develop the risk assessment. The risk assessment that was given to the judges at the county was well established. There's like 3 or 4 risk assessments used nationally, and it was one of them.
Okay.
We just evaluated its impact.
And what you all found though is that if you do this, then the outcomes improve, right? You put in place.
Yeah, exactly. People who could not afford to get an attorney were able to get out because they did not have to pay a financial bail to get out. So they were able to get out, but there was no impact on coming back in the sense that on recidivism, and that's a positive impact. And there was no impact on felony. There was no impact on violent crimes. There was no impact on any other type of crime. So we found that to be very, very interesting, but also encouraging because you are effectively, making the criminal justice system more fair, or at least kind of converging it and making it equal across the board.
But also, and sorry, Todd, I'll let you jump in the next one. But I want to make sure I understand the finding here, because what it means is that judges without the risk assessment maybe weren't doing as good of a job.
So,
or what happened when they stopped using the risk assessment? Did you see some of the negative outcomes reappear?
Well, it went back to basically using a bit more financial. So, you will go back to relying on the financial bail. Mm-hmm. So suddenly then somebody who cannot afford an attorney cannot pay that bail. So then you went back and having an increase in pretrial incarceration for those indigent defendants. That's basically what we're looking at without really any changes to, other types of outcomes, which is a new criminal activity. Now, I want to, Kirby, you mentioned something which is interesting. So in Texas, up until SB 6, which is basically known as the Damon-Allen Act, which was, set up, I think, in 2021, September of 2021. It's Senate Bill 6. Magistrate judges at that first appearance did not have enough information, in my opinion, on making an informed decision. What they typically had is the probable cause, which was what the arresting officer provided. That probable cause basically describes the arrest and the offense. And that was it in most cases. And I would say 99% of jurisdictions across Texas and beyond. That probable cause did not, for instance, say, well, this person, that was his or her first arrest. They've never been arrested before. Did not have any information on criminal history, did not have any information on other characteristics that could potentially help the judge make a better or a more informed decision. For instance, this individual is local. He went to the local high school. There's no flight risk, meaning he's not just driving through this county or this city. None of those information existed. And back then, prior to 2021, none of those information existed. So the judges made decisions on probable cause, and that's it. So most of them went with financial bail because that was the norm, the standard. Everybody did it, and if they could afford to pay the fine, the bail, even if their crime is really, really awful, if they can afford to pay it, they will literally walk out that door. Now, post Damon-Allen Act, which is SB 6, September 2021, there's basically some sort of reform where the judges now have a bit more information. They have some history, criminal history, arrests within the state, outside of the state, and other information. But it's still not enough because they still don't know about specific characteristics of the individual that will help the judge make a decision on whether they should be incarcerated because they are a risk to the society or incarcerated because they are a flight risk.
So you talked about the use of this risk assessment, and after about 3 months, they begin to go away. Was there pressure on the judges to move away from that and go back to the old system, or was that just kind of something that happened? It was a conscious decision they made.
That's a good question, and I don't believe I can answer that question. From my interactions with the county, from my experience, there was no pressure. It was just, it was a novel thing. Judges kind of used it for a while, and then basically eventually just went back, about doing their business. That's, I think, what probably happened. And it's interesting because that alone opens the door. Okay, well, how can we, maintain a way that, the effect is longer and more sustainable? and that's something that definitely worth studying.
So yeah, did you guys do any follow-up studies that, to assess the difference between using the risk assessment versus kind of the standard way of assessing bail, and kind of understand the differences and what people thought about it?
So we did not in particular do the comparison between risk assessment or not, but we did use a comparison between two jurisdictions. One used primarily financial bail and one used primarily non-financial bail. Out of 254 jurisdictions in Texas, I would say more than 90% of them rely on financial bail across the board. But there's a few that the majority of those decisions are non-financial. And we found that using a non-financial bail, primarily a non-financial bail, does not really affect recidivism. What it does, the difference seems to be in the failure to appear, where a financial bail seems to be positively correlated with people not failing to appear, which rationally that makes sense, because if I'm a bondsman and I have paid a financial bond and a financial commitment to the county on behalf of a client of mine, I want to make sure that my client appears to in court and is there at their court hearing, because otherwise I have a financial interest, and so for me it's an issue. However, while I have not done research on text reminders, there's current studies on text reminders. So instead of relying on somebody who's financially invested in you, it's simple text reminders by the court or by some sort of a system has also increased people, the likelihood of people showing up and lowered failure to appear. That's at least the initial findings.
Do we? So if I were going to push back on the idea of, well, maybe bail reform is bad because we have this failure to appear and we really need people to show up for their court dates, it's important for the criminal justice system, then do we have some sense of why people fail to appear beyond, okay, I don't have a cash incentive on the table, I'm not going to show up? Or are there other complicating, confounding factors that are at play as well?
There are, and that's actually a very important area of research. So the reasons for failure to appear are actually simple. Number one, people forget. Court hearings and appointments are months, because of the backlog and, the pandemic and COVID-19 even pushed some of those hearings further and further. Courts are catching up now, but so that's number one. Number two, often individuals don't have reliable transportation. So while they are aware of a court hearing, they may not be able to get to the court hearing. And number three, some of them don't understand the severity of missing a court hearing. We can reschedule it and so on and so forth. So these are very kind of simple reasons. And the last one that we've seen is some of those individuals are transient. They're young. Most of the crimes are committed by young individuals, predominantly male. And they lack. They change the phones. They pretty often. I mean, they use burner phones. They don't have reliable addresses and so on and so forth. So even if you do some of those reminders, they may not be. You may not be able to reach them. So all of those reasons kind of lead to having basically, reasons not to show up to court.
So it's complicated. The financial picture is part of the story, and certainly it helps to make sure that people show up, but it's not the only part of the story, because there are other conditions that are tricky. By the way, I was called for jury duty not that long ago, and when I went, I got dismissed because the person failed to appear. So thank you, person. I shouldn't say that. But you mentioned cost as well. How does this play out in terms of cost? What do we know about how does it help us in terms of the cost of the criminal justice system?
So the cost is actually front and center in almost every discussion that we have with jurisdictions. I mean, so commissioners and commissioner court, most of them are not judges. I mean, most of them are businessmen and engineers and all sorts of things. And they set the budget for the county. So for them, cost is front and center for any potential reform, whether it's a transformative new project or a program. And the cost can be looked at in several ways. ultimately the commissioner is interested in the cost to the county. What are we investing in? Are we investing in a system that reminds individuals automatically, or do we have to have somebody manning those texts and manually inputting basically information, and that's labor costs, and that's and number two, failure to appear. That has a cost to it, because now they have to make a note of it, set another docket, perhaps issue a warrant for your arrest, and so on and so forth. Even recidivism, you have to get somebody arrested again, and so there's a lot of prosecute somebody, book them again. Ultimately, the biggest cost to all of this is a pretrial incarceration, which is a day or a night in jail, because it's not just a bed and food, but also medicine and
right.
All sorts of needs that the defendants are. So you're looking at anywhere between $100 and $170, $180 per defendant per night, depending on where you are. A lot of the jails are also crowded, so there's a use of private jails, but that's a different story. Now, from that perspective, is ultimately, can we minimize the cost to the county, whether it's pretrial incarceration, whether it's move things to more automated, or dumping it on a bonds industry that has to deal with making sure that clients show up to court and we don't have to do anything, versus making sure that we don't have increased crime, we don't have increased failure to appear. Ultimately, judges do not want to be in the news when they release somebody and then that person goes and commits a heinous crime, right? And then it becomes not just a local, but state, even national story. That's exactly what they do not want. Now, commissioners and courts in jurisdictions may not care about the social cost and the overall costs, although from our perspective, those are even very important. I've been to magistrations and first appearances when somebody got a non-financial bail. She was able to get out without having to pay anything and make it to her shift as an Amazon delivery driver and not lose her job. And that's a big deal, because you lose your job, you stay in jail, you lose your job, lose your family, you lose your housing. Only bad things happen after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do we have evidence to that point that when those bad things happen, worse things follow? I mean, do you see greater recidivism? Do you see greater cost because of the social consequences of someone losing their job because they were in jail?
There are some studies actually even name or kind of identify 3 days in jail as a tipping point. Where anything beyond 3 days in jail, you're looking at losing your job, losing your family, losing your housing. This study is being under kind of revision in the sense that people have come up and say, well, it's not really clear. It's 3 days. Any pretrial incarceration is has negative effects. But yes, that's actually the next area of research in this field. Linking workforce commission data, tax records, to losing your job, after getting arrested, to health usage, to losing your housing, and so on and so forth. We're hoping to be involved in this kind of research, but linking criminal history to workforce and labor market data seems to be very difficult, and it is because you have to identify the individuals, you have to link the records. And it's a big endeavor.
Just if you think about it, you have all this data, you have all this research you guys have done on one side. On the other side, you have the political risk to the judges in the system that if something goes bad, then they could be blamed at the voting booth or other ways in the community. And you kind of addressed that a little bit earlier. So. Are there mechanisms to, balance the risk?
And I think that's the $1 million question. When we think about, let's rely on some sort of data and risk assessment and kind of have the judges or the human being and kind of be out of the decision making. In my personal opinion, I mean, that seems to be the safest, in the sense of, well, I'm relying on the data. If this is what the data says, that's, ultimately it's based on years of research, and I'm going to go with this, versus I rely on my own experience, and I know better than the data. And then ultimately that, it's an interesting trade-off. Unfortunately, a lot of the decision makers and judges are a bit older, so they will rely more heavily on experience. I've been doing this for a while. I know what I know what so you get some of that kind of approach, and they are a bit reluctant to use research, to use data, and to rely on it. This is changing as you have new judges and younger judges, and as data is becoming more prevalent. We are seeing, many and refreshingly, actually, very encouraging, stakeholders who want to rely on this and basically, let's go with it. I had one of the district attorneys, he's not a judge, but a district attorney who one time said something that I just, is stuck in my mind. He said, we've been doing this for 25 years and we get the same result. Let's do something different and see what we get. And I tend to agree. I mean, I think that's the right approach to it.
Yeah, we're starting to run out of time. I did want to ask you, because this does seem to me like, and Todd and I were talking about this before the program, about this feels like an area where maybe in a world of polarized politics, we can come together. And I know I'm a little naive and optimistic on that idea, but it does seem like there is some movement on the right and on the left that criminal justice reform is a place where we can find some agreement that we can cut costs. If you want to cut government spending, this is an area you can cut costs. You can get better outcomes. You can devote resources. And is that your general sense in terms of the people you're working with and the stakeholders? I know you work with a bunch of different funders on the right and the left and all areas in between. And when you're talking to stakeholders, is that your general sense that this is an area where maybe reform is possible or maybe bipartisan agreement? There are areas where we can find agreement?
Absolutely. Working in Texas, different jurisdictions have very different political, I guess, leaning and it's very diverse. And yes, absolutely. I've been to areas where, they're, leaning towards a certain direction, and you'd be surprised with the support that they get and in fact, you go to another, jurisdiction and it leans the other way, but also you get the same support. I agree, and it takes champions and individuals here and there to kind of move the needle. But I do see that, in my mind, I think it's encouraging. Ultimately, everybody agrees that nobody wants to have somebody spend a day in jail when they don't have to, when they're not a risk to the society, and everybody agrees that if you save cost to the county from pretrial incarceration and improve the outcome for that defendant, then let's find ways to kind of work towards that goal. Yeah, I agree with you.
Well, I was always proud of the time that I spent in the PPRI because of the work that was being done, because the goal of the organization is to inform state policy making with objective research. And I'm a big fan of your work. I continue to be a big fan of your work, and I look forward to following what you all come up with next in this area. So thank you so much for your time.
Ready to put the pedal to the metal? Go full speed ahead with MotorWeek. Whether you want a cleaner commuter, a family-friendly hauler, or to keep your drive running longer,
this is actually a great trick for extending the life of your engine.
Our experts have you covered. Hit the road, track, and trail with us every week. I'm John Davis. Never miss a mile of MotorWeek.
Todd, I feel like I learned a lot today. I feel like this is a really challenging area. What we want to do is we want to bring political science to the topic at hand so that we're dealing with empirical data and we're dealing with objective sort of truths. But sometimes it's about values and sometimes it's about stories. And we were talking about, stories earlier, and you were sharing one about, where you have to worry about someone being let out, right?
Yeah, I think that's the bottom line, is that this is inherently a political process, that because you've got, in one sense, public safety. Everybody wants the public to be safe. In the other sense, you've got data that shows that maybe and when it comes to misdemeanors, we don't need people to spend the night in jail if they don't have to. They need to go to work, and that's going to cascade problems down the pike. But the problem is when one story goes wrong, it begins to upend the whole system. So there's no sense that as we look at this today and in 2025, something needs to be done. There needs to be some adjustments. There needs to be some changes to the system. That we know more now than we used to. We have data, and so I think that we need to make some changes.
Yeah, the information and the research is powerful, but so are the narratives. And on the one side, I think you have the narrative that, oh, here's a story about someone who got out on bail. They then committed a crime. It's a horrible crime. It shouldn't have happened, and it should have never happened. The person should have never been out. That's a powerful argument in favor of limiting bail. But on the other hand, you also hear stories, and there was one just recently about someone in Harris County who was imprisoned for 18 years without a trial, and you're like, that's also and it's really a question about values. Should we is public safety more important to us, even if it means maybe occasionally we put an innocent person in jail, or is freedom more important? And even in the case that in some cases we're letting people walk the streets who shouldn't.
No, I think you're exactly right. What is our basic values going to be? And we need to think about these stories and that when you think about probabilities, that there's a low probability a person given this background, this situation, this context is going to, one, not show up or commit another crime or be, get involved in something else. They're probabilities, you know what I mean? And we have to recognize that when you go down a path, it's not going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we find because of the system. Nobody wants to be on part of something that went wrong.
Yeah, the one big place of hope that I have, I think, and it came in the last interview with George Naufal, when he talks about when judges have better information, they make better decisions. And I think part of our job and part of the job of the academy and of higher ed and of political science is to make sure that they have the best information possible.
No, I think that's exactly right, because that way you get away from this kind of gut feeling and you maybe some experience, but because as a society we should have, hopefully we've evolved to a point where we have data that can make better decisions, and better decisions are going to lead to a better criminal justice system.
Well, that's our happy 25th. It's been a blast. I hope we have at least 25 more.
I do too. Thank you so much for making it such an enjoyable time.
Thank you.
Inside Political Science is a production from KAMU, Aggieland's Public Television and Radio. For more information, visit tx.ag/insidepoliticalscience. Have a question for our experts? Email them at insidepolici@tamu.edu. Also, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss a new episode.